LawSikho's thorough newspaper analysis for 16th of October 2023. So starting with the today's session of the day, we are covering the editorial section which we have taken from the Hindu, which talks about Israel, Hamas and the laws of war. Then we'll be covering some news update, which relates to national news, international news, important days, awards and sports. And lastly, we'll be talking about some legal news update coming from the Honorable Supreme Court and the High Court of different states in India. Now, a very interesting editorial that we're talking about today is about Israel, Hamas, and the war that is going on between them. But very important perspective, which we certainly the media houses are not talking about, is about the laws of war, the international humanitarian law, which talks about the wars and their related legislative provisions. So let us talk about some legislative provisions, what are applicable to them, and how this war will have some merits and demerits on the paper. So let us talk about it. Okay, so the context is, as everybody knows, I hope you guys are well aware about this particular war that is going on. So on October 7th, Hamas is a Palestinian-based terrorist group. So it's a terrorist group which is recognized by many countries as a terrorist group. It's a Palestinian-based, launched an attack on Israel. Okay, killing hundreds of civilians and taking many hostages. Israel has retaliated with all its might, triggering a war in West Asia. So Israel retaliated on this particular war. Now, when this war happened, there would be certainly many laws which would be applicable to them. So there are two separate and independent international questions related to this wars. The first question which relates to this war is, under what condition and when can countries use force in their international relations? So this is generally known as jus ad bellum, regulated by United Nations Charter. Okay, so the first question is under what conditions the countries can use their power, use their force. The second question which comes up here is, how should the war be fought? What are the military actions which are permissible? This is known as just in bello. So the previous question is known as just in bello. This question is known as just in bello. Assuming a country is justified under the UN Charter to use force, it still must ensure that it satisfies just in bello obligations. Okay. Now, justification to use war does not relieve a country of its obligation to use such force in accordance with international law. So if a country has a justification that we are doing war in the defense, or the opposite country has done the harm to our civilians, it does not justify or relieve the country of its obligations to use such forces in accordance with international law. So equally, Hamas and Israel are liable to, follow this particular international humanitarian laws. Now, how of using force or the law of war is known as international humanitarian law. So how the war should be fought, how much forces, military actions are permissible, this comes under the international humanitarian law, which provides the rules that must be followed by the armed conflict. Now, what is international humanitarian law? First of all, let us talk about that. Who has made it? What type of laws come under this preview? So, international humanitarian law is contained in customary international law, the Geneva Convention of 1949, and Additional Protocol of 1977. Okay, it's a customary law. It regulates the conduct of party or groups engaged in an armed conflict. The primary objective, because by the name it suggests it relates to humans. So the primary objective is to protect the civilians and reduce the suffering of a war unleashes. No matter how just the cause of fighting a war, warring parties must and have to comply with the international humanitarian law. So the only and the basic purpose and the primary objective of this particular law is to reduce and protect the civilians. Now, do laws of war apply to ongoing conflict? Now, the basic question comes here is, do the laws of war that is coming up apply to the ongoing conflict? Now, yes, it applies. Because both the countries are using the military conflict. Military conflict is there between Israel and Hamas, and it's an armed conflict. As was held by International Criminal Court for former Yugoslavia in the prosecutor versus Discretion case, an armed conflict in international law exists when there is a resort to armed force between states or protracted armed violence between governmental authorities and organized crime armed groups or between such groups within state. So, what is this particular armed conflict was explained in the case by the International Criminal Court, which stated that resort to armed force between states or protracted armed violence between governmental authorities and organized armed groups or between such groups within the state. So when we resort to the particular armed force, they are called as armed conflict. So from till now, we talked about the context. We talked about what is international law, international humanitarian law, where this law is coming from. It is customary in nature, whether this particular laws are applicable on the present conflict or not. Now, international law classifies armed conflict also in two ways. Okay? One is international armed conflict, which is called as IAC, and another is non-international armed conflict. Now, according to the Geneva Convention of 1949, international armed conflict include all cases of declared war or any other armed conflict between two or more countries. So it is international. There are two countries involved. So the Geneva Convention has explained this particular definition. Now, coming up to the next. Now, non-governmental forces involved in battle with governmental forces. So, non-international armed conflict is what? When the non-governmental forces, which is Hamas, okay, and is involved with the battle in governmental forces in Israel. So, common Article 3 of Geneva Convention applies to non-international armed conflict. So, thus, Hamas and Israel are obliged to, abide by the international humanitarian law. Okay, now, in this whole process, when we are talking about wars, when we are talking about right, when we're talking about who did right, who did wrong first, and what was the defense by the other country, we forget about talking about the civilians that are dying. So the primary objective of the international humanitarian law we talked about is to protect the life of the civilians during the armed conflict. And there is always a distinction which is made between the combats and the civilians. So war party can only attack combats and military targets, not civilians and civilian objects. So the primary parties have to comply with the fact that they cannot target civilians. Accordingly, the killing of civilians by Hamas is illegal. Israel's illegal and belligerent occupation of Palestinian territories since 1967 does not allow Hamas to kill, injure, abduct, torture Israeli civilians or target civilian installation. Also, any military attack that causes disproportionate harm to civilians, who when judged against the expected military benefit, is barred. Now, what happened? Israel government has dropped reportedly 6,000 bombs on Gaza, causing widespread destruction and death. So Hamas' horrific attack on Israel does not justify Israel inflicting disproportionate harm on the civilian population of Gaza. All amounts to grave breaches of the Geneva Convention. Now, at the same time, Hamas is taking Israeli hostages. This is absolutely illegal. Hostage taking is specifically recognized as war crime by Article 8 of the Rome Statute, a treaty establishing the International Criminal Court. So it is absolutely illegal to take hostages. Now, taking of hostages is recognized as hostage taking as a crime. Now, so this was all about civilians. Now, what has happened? The Israel government has planned to block the supplies of food, electricity, water, fuel in the Gaza Strip, where close to around 2 million people live, which amounts to collective punishment, retaliating against a group for the conduct of individual said to belong to that group. The particular action is already will exacerbate the already harsh air and sea blockade of the Gaza Strip since 2007, and it violates the fundamental tenet of international humanitarian law. Now, punishing all Gaza Strip residents for Hamas action is absolutely illegal and it's a war crime. Additionally, the international humanitarian law parties must give advance warning to civilians to evacuate before attacking, which should be effective. The warning should be absolutely effective so that they can get evacuated. Civilians should be given enough time to evacuate. Israeli warning to the resident of the Gaza Strip is not effective. The warning was absolutely not effective. Giving the air and the sea blockade, the civilians do not have a realistic possibility of moving to a safe place. In any case, civilians who do not move out despite the warning must also be protected at the same time. Both sides need to respect their international humanitarian law obligations, and investigation should be launched into war crime committed. So this was all about the international humanitarian law, the legislative perspective of what is there, what are war crimes, what is armed conflict, how is international humanitarian law is applicable here. So we try to explain you the legislative perspective of this particular situation, and hope it gives you a different perspective of looking into the situation. Now, coming up to the national news of the day, India ranks 111th on Global Hunger Index 2023, erroneous measure of hunger, says government. India was ranked 111th out of 125 countries in the Global Hunger Index 2023. Now, the Global Hunger Index, India has a level of hunger that is very serious. The country came after neighboring countries is Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. However, India fared better than South Asia and Africa south of the Sahara, which recorded a score of 27 each. Now, general observations regarding world hunger. The 2023 index shows that after many years of advancement up to 2015, progress against hunger worldwide remains largely at a standstill. The Global Hunger Index scores for the world is 18.3, considered moderate and less than 1 point below the world's 2015 Global Hunger Index score of 19.1. Now, the score of India is 28.7 this year. Now, PM inaugurates 141 International Olympic Committee session in Mumbai. The Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi has inaugurated 141st International Olympic Committee session in Mumbai today. The session provides an opportunity for interaction and knowledge sharing among the various stakeholders related to sports. Addressing the gathering, the PM underlined the significance of the session taking place in India after 40 years. Now, let us understand the background of this particular session. The International Olympic Session serves a key meeting of the International Olympic Committee members. Important decisions regarding the future of Olympic Games are made on this session. India is hosting this particular session for the second time after the gap of 40 years. The previous session was held in New Delhi in 1983. That was the 86th session. The session was also attended by President of the International Olympic Committee, Mr. Thomas Bach, and other members of IOC, along with prominent Indian sport personality and representative from various sport federations, including the Indian Olympic Association. So PM inaugurates 141st International Olympic Committee session in Mumbai. Chale? Coming up to the next national news of the day, Cabinet approves establishment of an autonomous body, Mera Yuva Bharat. Now, Cabinet has approved the establishment of a body named Mera Yuva Bharat, that is My Bharat, to serve as an enabling mechanism powered by technology for youth development and youth-led development, and provide equitable access to youth to actualize their aspirations and build Viksit Bharat. In case of program components specifically meant for adolescent, the beneficiaries will be in the age group from 10 to 19 years. Now, the Mera Yuva Bharat will be launched on 31st October on National Unity Day. Okay. Now, what this particular, body will serve. The prime objective is to make the whole of the government platform for youth development under the new arrangement with access to resources and connection to opportunities. Youth would become community change agents and nation builders, allowing them to act as Yuva Setu between the government and the citizens. Now, what would be the objective and what it would lead to? Leadership development in the youth, act as a one-stop shop for young people and ministers, create a centralized youth database, ensuring physical ecosystem, improve the two-way communication to connect youth government initiatives. So cabinet approves establishment of an autonomous body, Mera Yuva Bharat. Hollywood actor Michelle Douglas to be given Satyajit Ray Lifetime Achievement Award. The Hollywood actor producer Michael Douglas will be presented with Satyajit Ray Excellence in Film Lifetime Award at the 54th International Film Festival, Goa. At the Cannes Film Festival this year, Douglas said that he had a wonderful experience in India and wanted to visit the country again. Now, let us know about some of the about Michael Douglas' career. Michael Douglas began his Hollywood career in 1966 and acted in more than 63 movies, winning the Academy Award for the Best Actor in 1987 drama Wall Street. Now, the veteran actor filmography includes a cult classic thriller, Basic Instinct, and the Oscar-winning One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Wall Street. Now, the exam takeaway. Previous winners of the Satyajit Ray Excellence in Film Achievement Award include Martin Scorsese, Wong Kar-wai, Lata Mangeshkar, and Dilip Kumar. Satyajit Ray Lifetime Achievement Award. चलें next. Important days की तरफ चलते हैं. International Day of Rural Women 2023, which is observed on October 15th. Now, let us understand the significance role. It recognizes the critical role and contribution of rural women, including indigenous women, in enhancing agriculture and rural development, improving food security, and eradicating rural poverty. The International Day of Rural Women was first celebrated on 2008 following a resolution adopted by United Nations General Assembly. The day was established to acknowledge the vital contribution of rural women to their communities and global economy. Now, some additional fact related to this particular day. On an average, women take up more than 40% of the agricultural labor force in developing countries, ranging from 20% in Latin America to 50% of more in parts of Africa and Asia. It's a big number, guys. Additionally, less than 15% of landholders worldwide are women, but the role of rural women is often underappreciated and underevaluated in shaping the future of their communities and the world. Hence, International Day for Rural Women underscores the need for gender equality, empowerment, and improved living conditions for rural women, as they are essential for sustainable development and eradication of poverty in rural areas. So it is celebrated every year on October 15th. Now, international news. Israel declared its northern border with Lebanon a close military zone as deadly clash with Hezbollah terror group intensify. Israel military declared its northern border with Lebanon a close military zone as deadly clashes with the terror group. The move marks another step in Israel's effort to prepare for the possibility that Lebanese terrorist group could open a second front to aid Palestinian terror group Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, Israel has announced a 4-kilometer buffer zone on the Lebanese border that civilians are strictly forbidden from entering, where clashes with Hezbollah forces are escalating. The decision comes after an anti-tank fire by Hezbollah killed one person in northern Israel, and Israel Defense Forces retaliated with artillery strikes in the morning. So this is all about some update coming from the northern border of Israel. Legal update coming from the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of We the Women of India versus Union of India and others, which relates to POCSO Act. State must provide support persons for child victim. It can't be left to parents' discretion. The Supreme Court has underlined that the state has the obligation to provide support persons as per the POCSO Act 2023 to child victims of sexual offences, and that the appointment of support persons cannot be made optional. The need for support persons should not be left to the discretion of parents of child victims, the court stated. The bench was headed by Justice S. Ravindra Bhatt and Justice Arvind Kumar, and the court is of opinion that the need of the support person should not be left to the discretion of parents in all cases, and the option of availability of support person and the right to claim the assistance of the support person should be made known to the victim parents. It's an obligation and not a discretion. Previously, on August 18, the bench had passed an order emphasizing the importance of appointing support persons by the state for child victim and has directed the NCPCR to file a status report outlining the progress of all the states in framing guidelines as per Section 39 of the POCSO Act. So very phenomenal news coming from the Supreme Court in the case of POCSO Act relates to support persons being mandatory and state as an obligation, and it is not a discretion, it's a mandatory requirement. Now, another news coming from the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of Yusuf at the alias Asif versus State. It relates to NDPS Act and states that if the sample are drawn violating Section 52A, trial stands vitiated. Supreme Court has set aside the order of High Court, sentenced a man to 10 years imprisonment for being found in possession of commercial quantities of heroin. The Apex Court set aside the order on the ground that NCB authorities failed to show that the seized contraband were drawn in the presence of magistrate and that the inventory of the seized contraband was duly certified by magistrate as mandated by the NDPS Act. In the absence of any material on record to establish that the samples of seized contraband were drawn in presence of magistrate and that the inventory of the seized contraband was duly certified by the magistrate, it is apparent that the samples and the seized contraband therefrom would not be a valid piece of primary evidence in the trial, and it will lead to the trial getting vitiated. The bench of Justice Abhay has Oka and Justice Pankaj Mithal stated in this particular order. So, important judgment coming from the NDPS Act, where the court talked about the trial proceedings can be vitiated if the evidence are not collected properly and as per the legislative order. That's all for the today's news update and the legal news. Thank you for watching and take care.